Today I'm talking about CVs, but not any CVs, I'm talking about your CVs. I'm reviewing your CVs that you sent me before the session. I reviewed them thoroughly and I will give you my tips and pointers on how you can improve them if you're looking to apply for a high-profile job such as a consulting firm or an investment bank. Welcome to another coffee break with me. My name is Heinrich and this is my channel Firm Learning, where I try to help you to become successful in the first years of your career. To start off your career right, you need to get the job in the first place. And a part of getting the job is getting your application material right. And this is specifically your cover letter and your CV. And today we are going to especially focus on the CVs of your application material. And to make this as hands-on as possible, I offered on my Instagram that you could send me your CVs and then I would review them and give you my tips here on my YouTube channel on how I would change and edit them to improve them, to make them even stronger. As always, if you're taking any value out of this video at all, please hit the like button for the YouTube algorithm and also subscribe to my channel to stay up to date on all my content. I'm releasing at least one video every Saturday here on this YouTube channel. And if you want to see even more content from me, also follow me on my Instagram. My handle is Firm Learning to stay up to date and potentially also participating in similar videos like this by getting your material reviewed in future videos as well. Today we are going to proceed in the following way. First, I'm giving you some general remarks on how the structure of your CV, in my opinion, should look like. And then I picked 4 CVs of the CVs that you sent me. And we will go in depth into lots of detail in these CVs. And I'm going to make several observations, things that I observed and what you can do to improve them. And I believe these are really interesting and helpful insights for all of you as well. Things that you should all take care of, things that you should look out for when you create your CVs. And many of these are things that I see frequently done wrong by many people. So I hope and trust that this is really going to be valuable and interesting to all of you. And to start it off, it is important for me to say that now the remarks and the things that I will say and critique and give you as a feedback, these are my opinions. I do not claim that I know the truth about how a perfect CV looks like. There are many opinions on that, and maybe if you ask other people, they will give you another opinion. But hey, you asked me, this is my channel, so my opinion is what you will get. But as always, take it with a grain of salt, and in the end it's important that you are comfortable with your application material, and if you have a good reason to deviate from what I'm telling you, then of course do so. So let's go briefly into some general remarks about the CV structure. One thing that I would strongly recommend to you is to have a one-pager format. A one-pager CV is just so much easier to read and comprehend than a two-pager CV. Especially in Anglo-Saxon countries, one-pager CVs are the standard, they're the norm, and there you really should apply with a one-pager CV. In some countries such as Germany, two-pager CVs are generally accepted as well, but as a general rule, you should never go over 2 pages. And in general, I highly encourage you, even in Germany, to go for the one-pager. It is always much better. I love it when I get a one-pager CV on my desk. In my humble opinion, it just looks much more professional and it's much easier for you to communicate yourself on the one-pager format. And from the CVs that you sent me, some are on a 2-pager format, and on these examples, I will try to give you some hints on what you can cut down to get it down to a one-pager. Now let's look into the content blocks. What are the key content blocks that your CV should consist of? And in the structure that I will propose here, there are 3 main content blocks and then 2 minor content blocks in the footer. And I prepared a very basic template of these different content blocks that you have, just as a rough guideline. At the very top, you should have your personal information, your contact information, so state your name, your address, your email, your telephone number, and so on. This will make it easy for the company to contact you without needing to look up other application material of yours. Then the 3 main content blocks are: first, your professional experience, second, your education, and third, your extracurriculars. So in your professional experience, this is where you list all your jobs, internships, and similar things. In your education, you list all the degrees that you have, the universities that you attended. In the extracurriculars, you especially list all the social things that you did, so any kind of volunteering that you did, non-profit organizations where you had some kind of leadership positions in, and similar things like that. Then you have an honors and awards section where you can list all your academic achievements, prizes, scholarships, dean list positions, and anything similar like that that will make you stand out. And in the end, you have an other qualifications section where you can list all your language skills, IT skills, any other certificates that you get, and similar things that you might want to highlight to your potential future employer. So of course, this is just a rough structure. Now you can debate how exactly the wording of these headers should be. You can debate whether you should add an additional line for hobbies at the very bottom. But generally speaking, if you follow a structure like that, then your overall structure structure should be fine. And now when reviewing the individual CVs, I will often refer back to the structure. So have this in mind. This is the basic recommended structure that I will refer to. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Let's get practical and review the first CV. And the first thing I'd like to address is the one-pager format. So as you can easily see, this CV is on a two-pager format. And I just want to address the point that many of you are saying, well, I just cannot fit this on a one-pager. But I'm telling you, you can absolutely fit such a CV on a one-pager format. So let's just go over a couple of things this guy could do to get it on a one-pager. And the first is the header of the CV with all the contact information. Here just so much space is wasted on a header. All the information here could just easily be included in 2 lines or so, and we will see other CVs in these sets of 4 CV where this has been done. So for your header, don't put each individual item of information in one new line, but have them all in one line after each other, and this is absolutely fine. Next is the borders at the sides. He has a significant margin to the left and to the right, and if you would just take out a bit of the margin, he probably wouldn't need some of the text breaks and some of the bullet points, so he would save a whole line by doing that. Same is true for the spacing between the dates and the text. There's just so much space between the date and the text. If you would just let the text start a bit more to the left, you would save space and probably save several lines in the indentation. Before we now dive into the content, let's go over some other minor format and layout things which I would recommend to improve. So first, regarding the date range, whenever he writes something that is still an ongoing activity, the way he puts it with the dash and then nothing after that is a bit weird. I would probably not do it like this. Instead, I would just write since and then the date without this empty dash afterwards. Then the font that he is using looks a bit informal to me, so I'm not exactly sure which font that is. Probably something similar to Calibri, but at least for my taste, it looks a bit too playful and informal, so I'd probably go for another one. And just a little minor thing on the bottom right, you see that he still wrote Seite, so this is German for page. So of course, if you have different versions of your CVs in different languages, please make sure that you translate every single word. This is just a small inaccuracy that of course should be avoided. Now let's dive into the content and let's start with the education section. What you see here, that this guy did some kind of a computer science degree, and probably especially if you're fresh out of university with your degree, I'd also try to highlight your area of specialization. What are the focus fields that you did during your studies? And of course, if you apply for a specific job, I try to tailor it a bit that it really fits the content of the job. So for instance, if you apply for a finance position, try to tailor what you write here, areas of specialization towards that role, highlight the finance courses that you did. And regarding grades, yes, it's correct. You should always put your grades on the CV. 2 tips that I would have to maybe improve the appearance of your grade is the first, whenever it makes sense for you to name the percentile of your grade, do it. So here now this grade 2.18 is of course an okayish grade, but maybe you're studying in a very tough degree subject. Maybe he's already in the top 10% or top 15% of performers of his class with that grade. So I do not know how in computer science the grade distribution looks like, but if you can make such a claim that you are in the top 10% of your class, that's of course highly beneficial. And then I would really recommend you to add that to your grade section. Another advice is with your thesis, so with your bachelor thesis or master thesis. If you have achieved a grade in your thesis that is significantly better than the overall GPA of your degree, then I would add the GPA of the thesis as well in brackets after the normal grade. Regarding the exchange semester that this guy did, I believe it takes far too much space, especially in comparison to the main degrees that he's actually doing. So for the exchange semester, I'd put all of this only in one line. By this, you save one line and could potentially invest it in going into more detail on what you did in your main degree. Now to the work experience section, and here I would encourage you to, whenever possible, use parallel grammar structures. And what this means is that from a grammar point of view, you start all your bullets in the same way. And you see this nicely done at his Suzuki entry, where he started both of the bullets with a verb. And usually for the work experience section, it's good and advised to start with such a verb, because this now emphasizes more on what you did, what you actually did at these positions, and this is always what you want. If you have bullets which are all written in the parallel grammar structure, it's just much easier to stand, much more effortless to read, and just gives an overall much more professional appearance. Now the next thing on the work experience, and this might be the most important point, because this is a feedback point that I will need to give to every single CV. In the bullets describing your work experience, you should focus on the impact. You should focus on what you have achieved, and not only as a team, but what your contribution to a specific point was. What I mean by that is that you should not just write a couple of general buzzwords describing the activities on a superficial level, such as first level support, but you should rather say exactly and specifically what you did and what your impact was, and whenever possible also to quantify that. So just a little example, instead of writing first first level support, you can write something like responsible for first level support of 1,000 employees, resolving 50 plus tickets every day. Now this sounds much more like impact. If I read it as somebody who gets the CV, I can imagine much more what you actually did than just by reading first level support, because this can mean everything and nothing. Another example here for the PwC position, if you talk about a rollout of a monitoring tool, try to give a bit more detail. What exactly did you do and how can you quantify that? So for instance, say how many users actually used your tool. So if you can claim that you as a working student created a tool that afterwards hundreds of consultants used at PwC, of course that is extremely impressive. So add a bit more flavor, say specifically what you did, what your contribution was, what the impact was that you delivered, and also make it quantified. This is really what distinguishes a strong framing of a work experience from a weak one. The next point of observation that I have, what I also see other people doing wrong, is that you do not need to give equal weight, equal space in your CV to every single individual position. So in this specific example, the position that you had as a student assistant as a Hessische Landesmuseum probably is a bit less relevant, is a bit less impressive for the most jobs that you will apply to compared to, for instance, your PwC position. So I'd already give more space in your CV to the things that are really important and relevant and less space to the things that are less relevant. And at some point, if you've collected now even more internships, maybe even already have a job, at some point you can also start dropping these less important positions that you have. You do not need to list every single internship that you did during your studies. And just as an example, also for me on my CV, even though I did all kinds of internship during my university times, most of them I just do not list anymore on my CV, because now of course I like to emphasize far more the actual full-time work experience that I got after graduating. Now regarding the qualifications and skill sections, the first suggestion that I would have is to put this below the volunteering section. So as I've shown you in my overall template, I believe it's common practice to rather start with your extracurriculars, with your volunteering, and then start with the qualifications and skills. But now here, if I look into the qualifications and skills here, I believe there's lots of opportunities to cut down space as well. So for the languages, there's just no need to put languages in individual lines. You can just write them in one line, one language after each other. So languages and then German, English, Russian, French with the proficiency level in brackets is completely fine. It will just take you one line. And then next regarding software and tools, and I know many people do that, but from my perspective, there's no need at all to write about your Microsoft Office skills. If you're a master graduate from a university, people will just assume that you have basic Office skills. Exception might be if you have really in-depth knowledge of specific fields, for instance VBA, then yes, you can put this, but just writing about Microsoft Office in general is not something I would do. It's just a waste of space. And the very same is true for Windows. I mean, come on, people will just expect you and trust you that you will have basic knowledge of Windows. There's no need of writing that. And here there's a distinction between software and the programming. Frankly, here I also believe that this is just a waste of space. You can consolidate this much more. So for instance, and here I'm not an expert, but at least based on I know, Anaconda and Spider are IDEs for Python. So it's completely sufficient to just say that you are proficient in Python. There's no need now to also mention all the IDEs that you have worked with in the past. Maybe this might be a bit more different if you really apply for computer science, for a software developer position, and you know that these are the things that are going to be used there. But for a general business position, there's no need into going this much of detail. Same is true for R and RStudio. You do not need to mention that you're proficient in RStudio if you're proficient in R. I mean, this is pretty much self-explanatory. So bottom line here, again, from my perspective, you can consolidate this whole section in just one line under the title of IT skills or something like that, and then just list all of these things, and it should be completely. Now regarding the volunteering section, and here I would focus much more on impact, on your leadership, and focusing on mentioning as many things as possible. What people will look for if they read these CVs is not that you have been part of as many social organizations as possible, where maybe you supported an event or did some minor activities. Similar to the work experience, what you should really highlight and focus on here is the impact that you had. It's your leadership in such an organization that will make you really stand out. So I'd say it's completely okay to mention 3 positions under extracurriculars. I believe it's also completely fine to only mention 2, but then focus much more on mentioning the specific things that you did. And again, quantify. So if you organized organized a conference, say how many people attended the conference. If you organized a fundraiser, say what amount of funds you raised. If you're the head of some kind of social organization, say how many people you are responsible for, how many members this organization has. This is what's impressive. This is how you show your leadership skills. And volunteering in the end should be about the impact that you had, right? So make sure that you mention this impact as precisely as possible. Now to the achievement section here, again, I believe you can put this much more concisely. In general, I do not believe that it is necessary to put the dates for scholarships that you have. Nobody will care when exactly you had a scholarship. Of course, if you then submit all the supporting documents with your application, then you should also have references for all your scholarships, and then these details will be listed there if anybody is interested. But in general, nobody will care about that. So no need to put the dates. And instead of that, again, I would just have one line with your scholarships and then just list all the scholarships that you have collected. This is usually much more effective and you can save lots of space for that. And similar thing is true for the publications. So in general, if you have a background in academia, maybe you did a PhD and have all kinds of applications, then what you can do is make an appendix to your CV listing all the applications. So what you can do here, instead of now listing the full citation of your paper, is again in the achievement section to have one remark. You just briefly mention that you have a publication in the XYZ journal, and then if the journal is well rated, so if the journal has, I'd say, at least a B rating or an A rating, or ideally of course an A+ rating, then rather say how the journal is rated, because this is what's really impressive. In the end, it's not impressive to have a journal publication in a completely unknown journal, but it is of course extremely impressive if you have an A+ publication. So rather talk about this than spending all the space on giving the full citation of your journal paper. If somebody is really interested in that, he can look it up anyways. Okay, first one done, let's jump into the next CV. And I try now to not repeat myself too much, so I will now not stress every single point in the same way that now I already did. But of course, if you here see something that I already gave feedback on in the earlier CVs, the feedback will be applicable here as well. And this lady provided me some questions that she asked me on her CV, so I will now go over these questions and answer them, and by that I hope touch all the relevant points here. And the first question is whether she should keep the one-pager CV because she feels like the CV is far too full, or than enough stuff going on to spread it out in 2 pages. And by now I hope the answer is no surprise to you that no, you should keep the one-pager format. This at least would be my strong recommendation, and I have no doubt at all that you can fit all this information easily on a one-pager CV. Because now the second question was what I think about her layout. What you directly see, of course, this is a bit of an unorthodox layout. This is not the classical investment style one-pager CV that you see out there. And my general advice here would be to be careful with these kind of things. So while of course I wouldn't say that it looks bad or something like that, you should very carefully look out for the types of jobs that you apply for. Especially if you apply for consulting or for investment banking, these companies are a bit conservative. And having such an alternative design approach for your CV will at least not help you in the process. So I'm pretty sure that nobody in the HR department of Goldman Sachs or BCG or wherever will say, wow, this layout looks so great. This is just not how it works. So best case, people will be just indifferent. But of course, worst case would be that people are actually irritated by that. Now, what could go through the head of an HR person is that this candidate potentially just didn't do her research. This candidate just doesn't know how a CV should look like in such a professional environment. And this, of course, is not the reaction that you want when you apply to these firms. So where I might see this a bit differently is if you apply for a creative position, if you apply for a marketing agency or any other job where creativity and open-mindedness is really at the core of the job description. So for these kinds of positions, yes, I believe it might be a great idea to be a bit more creative, to think a bit more out of the box regarding the layout and the style of your CV. But of course, this is now a very specific field that we are looking at. So my overall opinion on that is that there isn't much of an upside of using these kind of alternative CV formats, but there is the downside that somebody significantly dislikes this and believes it's unprofessional. So I would just recommend not doing that and rather going for a standard CV format. You want to impress by the content of your CV and not by the layout. Another thing I dislike about the layout, that optically the focus of this is here on the left part. There's the highlight. So I would claim that this left section is rather the stuff that you usually would put in the footer of your CV. So it's not actually the stuff that is really at the core of what the viewer should be interested in. But the most important stuff is rather on the right. So I do not think that you're doing yourself a favor by setting it up this way, by highlighting the things that are less important for the viewer. Another thing that I'm noticing, at least if I see it correctly, is that the font size on the right is smaller than the font size on the left. And to me, this just doesn't make sense for the one reason again that the stuff on the right is actually more important than the stuff on the left. But also I believe that it's in general bad practice to use different font sizes in your CV. The only exception might be maybe the name in the header, which you maybe can do in a bit of a higher font size. But even this is not necessary. And for sure within the body of your CV, you shouldn't work with different font sizes. This is just confusing to the eye. Then another general remark for your date ranges, make sure that the orders of your elements follows a logic. And usually you start by the things that are still ongoing, then you order the other elements anti-chronologically when they have been completed or when this episode has been finished. But this is now not the case here, because if it is the case that the things that are still ongoing are put first, then why is this element that is going on since November 16 there at the bottom? Why isn't it above the TEDx element if it's still ongoing? So the order of the elements here just doesn't make sense to me. Make sure that your lists do. And some other questions that this lady had is, first, what can I take out? And second, what do I do with all these online courses that I took? So let's start with these online courses. Let's start with your education section, because I agree that the way this education section is set up at the moment is pretty confusing. There are just so many elements in there, and you really need to pay close attention till you really understand what your actual degrees are and what some other study activities were, for instance, these online courses that you did in parallel. My general advice here would be that I wouldn't put online courses at the same level as your full university degrees. Rather have this footer section of your CV, this other qualification section, and there you can then list all your online courses, and you shouldn't have more than one line for each online course that you took. This will save you significant space here above and also will make it much easier to read and much easier to process what exactly you did, what exactly your main educational background is, because of course, at least today, how HR departments see that this is still your university education and less some online courses that you took. And similar thing holds true for this project study from 16. So if I understand this correctly, this lady took some university level courses while she was still in high school. While this is of course pretty cool, I'd also not highlight this here in the education section. I'd probably rather frame it for something to be included in an honors and awards section, where you can frame it as an academic honor that even though you were only in high school, the university already accepted you for a university level course. So I'd probably write something like this, admitted to the XYZ project, and then briefly describing it afterwards. And by doing that, you can really save some space here in the main section of your CV, where you should really highlight the main stages of your academic career. The next question was how she should handle her scholarship section. What scholarships to include and how to put it in the CV. And again, if you follow my basic template, then you have a section honors and awards, and this is a section where you can place all your scholarships. And now to what scholarship exactly you should include? Well, something like the Fulbright, of course, is a very prestigious and well-known scholarship. So yes, this for sure is something that you should include. Now something like the Femtech, so here I do not know what exactly this is, but sounds good, why not? I mean, for sure you can include this. Now to one thing where there are many questions around is this E-Fellows scholarship. So this is a scholarship that is pretty well spread in Germany. It's something that quite a lot of people have, but of course not everybody has. So people ask themselves, well, should I include my E-Fellows scholarship or not? And my simple answer would be that, well, probably I would include it if I have nothing better to show. So again, looking at Germany, once you have collected a BMBF scholarship, something like Studienstiftung or something like that, then for sure I wouldn't mention it anymore. But if your section on honors and awards still looks a bit empty, then yes, sure, why not? Then just include it. And this is now a general point that I also said earlier. What exactly you include or not include on your CV depends on what stage of your career, what stage also of your university study program you are at. In the beginning, if you're fresh out of high school, if you are in the first semesters of your university program, and it's completely okay to also include, for instance, internships that you did during your high school time, which maybe were only a couple of weeks long. But over time, once you did more relevant internships, more prestigious internships, then at some point, take this older stuff out. In my opinion, you are strongly devaluing your strong internships if they stand next to this high school thing you did for 2 weeks somewhere where you were a really young person. And same thing is true here for the scholarships. I would leave it in until I have enough other academic honors and awards that then at some point can replace this E-Fellows scholarship. Now regarding the content, how you describe your work experience, this is really an area of your CV where I would highly recommend you to go over that again. Now I do not want to repeat all things I said for the previous CV, but it's really important that you focus much more on your contribution, on the impact that you had while working in these positions. And again, quantify, always quantify. Try to have a number in almost every single bullet point that you use when describing your work experience. And similar thing actually is true for your volunteering, for your extracurricular experience as well. Now to your volunteering section, here you list 5 different activities, most of them also overlap. As somebody who reads the CV, I would probably doubt that you were really able to have a significant impact in all these positions. So what I would really recommend you is to focus more. Maybe instead of mentioning 5 things, rather cut it down to the 3 or so things that you really feel like were the most important, most relevant to you. And here again, now focus on your leadership, on your impact, what you did to really make a contribution, make an impact to your community. This is what your extracurricular section should be all about, how you made a contribution for the good of society. Now to the next CV. What I want to point out in the beginning is that without reading a single word, just from the look and feel of that, this is how a classical Anglo-Saxon one-pager CV looks like. So if you wonder what a good and sorted layout of an MBB consulting, of an investment banking CV looks like, this is the look and feel that you want to go for. Maybe some of you believe that it's too full, that it's too packed with content, but what you need to understand is that the feeling that you want to create, the look and feel, needs to be that it's completely packed with amazingness of yourself. This is the picture that you want to portray. So as somebody who reads the CV, you want to just go over it and read every single line, and every single line is just impressive. Great university names, great grades, great accomplishments, great impact, great numbers. This is the feeling that you want to go for. What you also see here is that in contrast to all the other CVs, he has very little margins at the side, at the top and at the bottom. Again, this is very typical for these kinds of CVs because this really allows you to just stuff lots of content into them. This guy is currently an LSE master student and he told me that he already worked with the career services at LSE on his CV, and you can really see that, at least for these high profile consulting and banking jobs, this is the style that you should go for. Another thing that I'd also like to point out is how little space he is using in the header to put all his contact information. If you look at the other CVs, there the contact information take a quarter or even a third of the page. This is just a complete waste of space. You can just have that in 2 lines or so in the header, and this is completely fine. So even though this is already looking great, I do believe there are a couple of things he can do to make this even stronger. One thing is that, at least in my opinion, he did a bit too much on the formatting. So he uses capitalization, he uses bold, he uses italic, he uses underlines. Individually this is okay, but I wouldn't do all these things at the same time. So probably, for instance, here I wouldn't work also with italic font. If almost everything in your CV is highlighted by capitalization, boldness, italic, underlines and so on, and this uses meaning, and these kind of highlights you want to use to create a structure on your CV. So I'd probably just take one step back and probably take out, for instance, the italic font. The next thing is that even though, as I said, it's great to really pack it with lots of content, you should make sure that it's easy to understand when the new entry starts. And here I believe that the distance between 2 entries is almost the same as the distance between 2 lines within 1 entry. So I would change that and I would slightly increase the distance between 2 entries to make it easier to read when a new entry begins. And yes, this is taking some space, but in a few moments I will also give you a bit more suggestions on what you can do to save some more space. So let's now jump into the education section. The first remark that I want to make here is how you state foreign grades. So this is now a CV in English, but he studied in Germany in his undergraduate. And then what some people do, as in this example, is that they take their German grade and then they try to calculate that into some other kind of format. And here in this example now into the American format of 4.0. And here the general rule is that you should not tamper with your grades. You shouldn't by your own initiative now try to apply some kind of calculation formula to transfer it in any kind of other grade system. You should always state the grade exactly in the way that it is stated in your diploma that you received. So of course now if you did receive a diploma in English and it showed the grade in exactly this way, then it is fine. But in general, I would not do these kind of calculations by yourself. Same true is here for this German School of Milan for the 98 out of 100 scale. So of course if you received a diploma where the grade is stated this way, then I would put it this way, but I wouldn't do these kind of calculations by yourself. Now just a minor remark on the bullet with the poly-sci program. Here there seems to be a double spacing, so just take out one of the spaces. Regarding this Brown University pre-college program, this is likely something where you can save a bit more space, so I would probably not put this as prominently here in your main education section, but for me this is rather something you can put below under other qualifications. And the reason is that even though Brown University of course sounds great, it's a great Ivy League university, you usually do not get admitted to these kind of summer school programs due to your academic merit, but usually you just pay for it, and everybody knows that, right? So I wouldn't consider this now a great academic achievement, but rather put it below under other qualifications this way you can just state it in one line or so and thereby save space. Now, regarding the content here, again, I just want to encourage you to focus much more on your contribution, on your impact. Just as an example, in your childcare position, you write that you develop teaching plans and that you taught children. Here I would really quantify this now. For instance, by saying that you taught 200 students in total, or by saying that you taught 3 different classes of students, or anything like that. This just makes it much more tangible, and it really shows that you made this impact, that you were the teacher. Really always stress much more on your contribution and the impact that you had. And on the next point, the fundraiser point, the guy asked me whether he should include now the quantification of $1,000 because he feels like maybe this is a bit little of an amount to mention that. And at least in my opinion, again, even though it's not the largest amount, I believe it's much more honest, it's much more tangible to write that you raised $1,000 than to not writing that. Personally, I believe that this is the better thing to do and that this is the thing that is just more powerful. Hi guys, Heinrich here. So while editing, I noticed that somehow a part of the video was missing. And now the next section refers to a question this guy asked me, and he asked me 2 questions specifically. First, how important is it really to quantify all your achievements? And second, is it okay to exaggerate in your CV? To what extent can you maybe inflate a bit the things that you did? And what is the line that you should not cross? So now the next section refers to yes, quantification is great. It just helps you to make the things that you did sound much more tangible and really helps you to tear out the impact that you had in your roles. So to what level is it okay to exaggerate? And here I'd make the remark that yes, it's true that probably most of the CVs that you get in your hand, there's some level of exaggeration in it. Of course, people try to portray themselves as positively as possible. So because your competition is doing, you should of course not be shy. Make sure that you really state all the achievements in the appropriate level of greatness. Do not hold back. Really make it salient what the impact is that you had, what the leadership is that you showed. Do not be modest here on your CV. This is not what will help you. But of course, there is a limit, and this limit is where you're now making factually wrong statements. This for me is now an ethics issue. While I'm sure that many people exaggerate the things that they write on their CV, even beyond of what's actually factually true, in my opinion, this is just unethical, and I just would not cross this line. This will probably put you at a slight disadvantage compared to some other candidates, but hey, life is unfair. So now last but not least, CV number 4. This is now again a 2-page CV, and here again I would of course recommend you to put it on 1 page, especially because the second page is barely used. So here it would be especially easy for you to consolidate it all on 1 page, and this is something that therefore I would highly recommend. Next thing you notice is that the header is missing with the contact information, so I assume he just took it out to anonymize himself, but of course then in your actual CV you should include a contact information section at the top. One thing that I like about the CV is how you put the dates. Saying this because I now referred to this earlier as well, how he's using these numbers for the months, then the slash and then the year. I believe this is a very clean and easy to read and easy to understand format. So at least for my taste, this works quite well. Regarding the overall layout, be a bit careful that everything is nicely aligned. So what you can see here is that these blue lines, they do not neatly start at the very left of the letters, but rather a bit more to the right. So this looks a bit unclean. This is just not correctly aligned. So just have a look at that again, please. And the same is for the indentation. So at least if I see this correctly at the left, the dates, they do not all begin at the very same plane. So make sure that the indentation is consistent and all the bullets start at the same level. So what this guy did very well is the GMAT. So usually I would recommend to not put the GMAT above at the education section, but maybe below in the honors or maybe in the other qualifications section or somewhere below. But of course, if you did a very strong GMAT as this gentleman did, maybe especially then if your other grades aren't that strong, then it is an option that you could go for to then also include the GMAT next to the degree that you took the GMAT for. And here, of course, the GMAT of 740 is a very strong score that might very well overcompensate some other weaknesses in the GPAs of the other degrees. Now, because I already said so much about how you should write your bullets in your work experience section, let's rather look into the skills section, because here he did something which I see many people do in some variations, which at least personally I believe you should not do this. And this is this weird scale that he is using to measure the level of his skills. And while first of all I find it highly doubtful whether you should include Microsoft Office skills in general on your CV, as I also said earlier, but let's now assume that you include it. Where I would now be very careful is if you put yourself as a full expert on such a topic, 6 out of 6 points, so basically 100% proficient user of this tool. And just to contrast that, so I would consider myself a pretty proficient user with, for instance, Excel as well, but I would never claim that I'm at the 100%, right? That I know know it all about a tool such as Excel. Because in Excel, even though you're already quite advanced, there are always more topics to learn, more topics to master. Let's start with array formulas, with power pivot, with VBA, all these very advanced techniques. And if you really master all these things, if you're really an expert, then okay, then maybe at some point you can write that. But just be careful here, because as an interviewer, if I see this, I would just directly pick it up and challenge the candidate a bit on that, right? And then also the Microsoft Office suite is so vast. Besides these basic programs like PowerPoint, Excel, or Word, it also includes programs like SharePoint or Access. And do you really master all these tools at the 100% level? So guys, be careful. And similar things are true for your language skills. So if you put languages on your CV on a B1 level or so, then be ready that the interviewer maybe in the middle of the interview switches to Italian or switches to French, just to test a bit whether you do have these basic language skills that you claim to have. So if you can speak these languages at this level, this is perfect, but this is just something where it's really easy to call you out in an interview, so be careful. And the last thing I want to draw your attention to here on the activity section is hunting. And with hunting, it's a bit similar to an affiliation to a political party. So while I trust that it can be a very comforting leisure activity, maybe also a great conversation starter if your interview partner is interested in that or maybe does the same activity, there just are people who see things like hunting very critically. And some of them are not really open for arguments, but rather see these things on an ideological level. So I would probably not write on my CV that I'm a hunter, because there might be some people in HR believing that hunters are really evil and unmoral persons. And while now I trust it's easy to make an argument in the exact other direction, you just do not want to put your application at risk for such a stupid little thing. Okay, so let's wrap it up. This was my review of your CVs. I hope that you found this interesting and valuable, and I hope that you really took something out for your individual CVs as well, that this really helped you to get your application material to the next level. So now I'd love to hear also from you. Would you have other suggestions, other tips for the 4 CVs that we looked at? Leave a comment below in the comment section so that also the other people here in the community can participate from your knowledge. I would highly appreciate that. And as always, if you took any value out of this video at all, please hit the like button for the YouTube algorithm, and also subscribe to my channel to stay up to date on my content. And please also turn on the notification bell, as otherwise YouTube might not show you my videos even if you're already subscribed to me. If you want to see even more content from me, also follow me on my Instagram. My handle is Firm Learning. Thanks for watching. My name is Heinrich. This is Firm Learning. Have a good day to all of you.